Take it for a grain of salt. We are, full disclosure, recording this on a Wednesday early afternoon. So you could be listening to this and we have confirmation that Lewis Hamilton has in fact signed an extension with Mercedes. But as of right now, a Spanish publication has written a piece that it is rumored that he has signed that said extension. It involves a 1-year guaranteed deal plus a 1-year option. It also alleges in the said rumored piece that he has taken a pay cut, which I find fairly fascinating. I really want to see if that comes to fruition. If that is the parameters and the Spanish publication has gotten everything right, they also say that they expect it to be announced during the Canadian Grand Prix weekend, so soon in the coming days. Would you be surprised if that's the parameters, Laurence, of Lewis Hamilton's deal moving forward?
A little bit, yeah. The announced at the Canadian Grand Prix bit, not so much, because Toto Wolff was speaking to CNBC, I think, earlier this weekend and saying that they've been having meetings since Spain. We knew already there was going to be a meeting on the Monday after the Spanish Grand Prix, and it sounds like they've had a few more and they've made progress, and now it's really just getting down to those numbers. But the 1+1, I'm a little bit surprised at. I mean, you can frame that two ways. If Mercedes want to, they can probably say multi-year deal with an option or something like that. It's rare that we get exact numbers in any sense. Sometimes we do get the length of the contract put out with, say, 2-year, 3-year, sometimes even 5-year contracts we've seen fairly recently between drivers and teams. But sometimes they'll just say multi-year, which means more than one, but could be two, could be maybe even one and an option. You never know, because the options kind of get exercised behind closed doors as well. The thing I find hard to believe is that there'd be some kind of pay cut. But you never know. I mean, it's a tricky one. And also, I think with Lewis and Mercedes, it's so much more than just this standard driver contract now. It goes into what happens when he retires, the ambassadorial role that he said he wants to continue to have with Mercedes, the various charities and funds they've set up to try and improve diversity in the sport. All of these are considered between Hamilton and Mercedes long-term projects. So to think that, they're at the point where they're kind of really knocking each other back and having these hard negotiations, it's a tricky one. I think there's a lot of desire from both sides to make this a long-term thing. But we'll have to wait and see. We will never find out whether he's taken a pay cut or not. We don't know for certain exactly how much he's on right now. The rumors are anywhere between $40 and $50 million a year. But then you have like promotional stuff on top and, extra added personal deals. So we don't really know, and I don't think we'll ever find out whether this contract was a step backwards or not in that regard. So any journalist speculating on that is on pretty safe territory, because the team will never confirm or deny it, because they don't want to give any hint of which way it's gone. But in terms of the length, I was probably more expecting a 2+1, so 2 guaranteed years plus a potential third year. But yeah, this report suggests 1+1, which I suppose is possible. But Lewis has said a number of times recently, he doesn't want to just add an extra year onto his contract now. He wants to be there for several years, because I think he still sees it as a multi-year project to get Mercedes back into championship winning ways. He's hoping, as are all of Mercedes, that they can fight for race wins, maybe even by the end of this year, but certainly by the start of next year. But that doesn't mean you're winning championships straight away, if you're just taking the odd victory here or there. So I'll be a bit surprised if it's just one confirmed year. But yeah, we'll wait and see. And by the time our good listeners listen to this conversation, they may already know the answer. But that's just the way it goes sometimes.
A couple follow-ups. Has that always been the way in Formula One, that you don't know exactly the salary that somebody is on? I liken it to American sports, where with salary caps, which Formula One now essentially has, exactly what every single player on a roster is making. So I find that a little bit odd that Formula One, it's not common knowledge or knowledge that is put out.
Yeah, frustratingly, it's all speculation. I think by the time you kind of amalgamate everybody's numbers, all the journalists that do it, I've sat next to journalists, and I won't name names here, but they literally pluck a number out of the air and then just type it into their keyboard. And then of course you can go to the PR person and say, well, is it $40 million? And again, they're not going to say either way. So, you write it. And then if they have a problem with it, you're like, well, tell me what it is. And then obviously they can do. But yeah, it's not quite the same as US sports, because remember, the drivers are not in the budget cap. So in fact, the teams don't really have to declare, apart from to the FIA, of course they do, but they don't have to declare publicly where their money's going in the budget cap anyway. We had a bit of that with Red Bull last year, but only because they
were audited.
2021. Exactly, they were audited, and it was important for the transparency of the regulations that it was clear where they'd overspent and what those overspends were. But the driver contracts are not part of that at the moment. There was a lot of talk not so long ago about including driver contracts in the budget cap or having a separate budget cap for driver contracts. And you'll notice at that time, a lot of drivers, including Max Verstappen and Charles Leclerc, signed very long contracts because they wanted to guarantee that the market value they had now, unrestricted, sat there for a number of years. But that kind of rumor and suggestion of a driver budget cap seems to have gone away, just because the budget cap, which is really on the technical side, the building of the cars, the racing of the cars, has been so successful in managing costs and allowing teams to operate kind of successfully, that there's a question as to whether we really need to bring the drivers into it. But I would love a rule if it was just like a kind of halfway house. Let's have a rule where the drivers, we have to know what they're on, because it's fascinating, isn't it?
It is.
And then to compare across sports as well would be very interesting. But we're not quite there yet. But we have these rough numbers. As I said, like Max Verstappen, Lewis Hamilton, both rumored to be on somewhere between $40-50 million a year on some very long contracts in Max's case. And Lewis's one, of course, gets renewed, seems every 2 years or so. He did a 1 year one a while back. But every time you renew it, from Lewis's point of view, he'll be hoping that number goes up. Of course, This report suggests maybe it's going down. But yeah, there you go.
When it comes to that plus 1 year, the option year, how does that play out? And what could the possible stipulations be? Is that up to Lewis? Is that up to Mercedes? Is it up to both? Are there parameters set for that option year to automatically renew or not? How does that work?
Yeah, so it's essentially a get out clause. And sometimes that's on both sides. Sometimes it's on one side. If you remember the Daniel Ricciardo saga with McLaren, it was only on Daniel's side, and they had to kind of move to basically pay Daniel out. And so that does happen as well. It's sometimes related to performance. So if a driver is at a team and that team is not at the front of the grid, not winning races, but they feel they are a race winning driver, they may set a some kind of clause that says they have to score X amount of points by this part of the season to prove that the team is going in the right direction. If that isn't there, then an exit clause can open up and they could potentially find a way out. Again, all this stuff where you only ever hear the rumors about, often you hear when it breaks down is when you find out what some of these exit clauses are. But if everything goes well and the option gets taken up, it's very rare that you hear about it. In fact, there were some reports from Sky Sports, Craig Slater, who's a very good journalist there, reporting that George Russell, behind the scenes, while everyone is looking at Lewis Hamilton, has just signed an extra option year on his contract to take him through to the end of 2025. So there's an example of where one was in a contract. We didn't even know it was in the contract, really, unless you're very close to the Russell camp. And yet it looks like it's been taken up already, and he's likely to be there till 25. But, from Russell's perspective, you think how young he is in his career, how much potential we know the Mercedes team have, and how blocked off Red Bull is by having Max Verstappen there. Why wouldn't he take up that option at this stage and stay until the end of 25? So, that's another interesting little one to probe into this weekend for the journalists on the ground.
Remember, we disclosed up front that this was a Wednesday afternoon recording. So if you're listening to this and you're like, I already know this news, it's a done deal, that's because we don't have the information confirmed as of right now. We hope to throughout the weekend. And of course, Nate is on the ground right now as we speak.
Thanks so much for watching ESPN on YouTube. And for more sports highlights and analysis, be sure to download the ESPN app. And for premium content and live streaming, subscribe to ESPN Plus.